Recording, get going.
Yep, I'll start the recording here. All right.
Right. Good evening, everyone. And well, actually, I'm not gaveling us in, but good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 21st, 2022 meeting of the Boulder City Council. And we're going to get started here with a few announcements before we officially begin the meeting. And our first announcement is about COVID-19 testing and vaccinations. For information about testing and provider locations for free COVID-19 testing, go to www.boco.org/COVID testing. And the Boulder site is at 2445 Stasio Drive. That's open 7 days a week from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Information on vaccines and provider locations, go to www.boco.org/COVID vaccine. And next, we have a council meeting day change. This is our very last Tuesday meeting for the Boulder City Council this year until something else changes. So beginning on July 14th, after our break on 2022, City Council meetings and study sessions will change from Tuesdays to Thursdays. Start time remains at 6 p.m. So that will impact some board and commission meeting times and some sign-up timelines. So the list of those are that Planning Board will have new meeting times on the first, third, and fourth Tuesdays of the month at 6 p.m. Board of Zoning and Adjustments has second Tuesdays of the month at 4 p.m. Design Advisory Board will be on the second Wednesday of the month at 4 p.m. And the public comment sign-up timeline will open Friday before the meeting at 8 a.m. and close Wednesday before the meeting at 2 p.m. And more information about this transition can be found at bouldercolorado.gov/announcement/council-meeting-day-change. And then one more announcement that we do not have a slide for is I wanted to let everybody know that the annual city food tax rebate program is open for applications. It's been open since March 1st, but it does close on June 30th. So applicants should get their applications in before June 30th. And please, for information on that program, I won't go into all the details, but you can find that at bouldercolorado.gov/services/food-tax-rebate-program. And thanks very much to Councilmember Spear for suggesting that announcement. Okay, with that gets us through our announcements. So I can now gavel us open and get the roll call going. So let's call to order, and Alicia, please read the roll.
All right, sir. Thank you. And good evening, everyone. Councilmember Benjamin.
Present.
Mayor Brockett.
Present.
Councilmember Folkerts.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Friend.
Here.
Councilmember Joseph will be arriving later. Councilmember Spear.
Here.
Wallach.
Here.
Weiner.
Present.
And Yates.
Right here.
Mayor, we have our quorum.
Great, thanks so much. All right, and now I'm requesting a motion to amend the agenda, and I'm going to explain it a little bit as I propose it. The proposal is to remove items 3H through 3K from the consent agenda, and these are the first reading of our ballot ordinances. And then add an item 8B, which is a council discussion on those ballot ordinances. And the reason for this proposal is that we wanted a little bit more time to finalize the verbiage and exactly what went in each of the ordinances. So rather than pass them on first reading tonight, we thought we would discuss at the end of the meeting exactly the next steps for them and then have them brought back on consent in July. So if that's all right with folks, if we could get a motion.
I motion we amend the agenda.
Second.
Thanks very much. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your physical hand. Okay, the motion, the agenda is duly amended. Okay, Alicia, we have our consent agenda now?
Yes,
no,
sir.
we have open comments. We have open comment for the.
I was going to say that.
So, Ryan, are you going to read our guidelines this evening?
Yes, happy to do that. And thank you, Emily, for pulling up those slides. And thanks to community members who have joined us this evening to share your perspective and your opinion. And in participating in city council meetings, the city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. And this vision does support physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and council, as well as democracy for people of all identities. There's more information about this on the website shown here on the screen. And the next slide, please. And I want to share a few examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that will support this vision and our open comment and public hearing this evening. These will be upheld during this time. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants have signed up to speak using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before be speaking tonight. And we're allowing audio testimony online this evening. And so with that, we'll turn to our first speaker. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ryan. We have 4 people signed up to speak, and they are, I'll read all of them: Lynn Siegel, Patrick Murphy, Evan Ravitz, and Sue Prant. Lynn, you have 2 minutes.
Geez, 4 people, 2 minutes. What's wrong with this image, with this picture? There's not enough people advising you. So why do you have 2 minutes? So you can, sit there for 8 minutes instead of 45 minutes. And you can't give us 3. Like, what's with you? I don't get it. Like, is there something I'm missing here? I don't see this. It's very simple. All you have to do is say, if there's, less than 20 people signed up, then you get 3 minutes or what have you, so that you get up to your 45 minutes. What are you trying to pull off here? What are you getting away with? A lot. That's a problem. 3 minutes for 4 lousy people. Go for it. God, too many subjects, too little time. I've got to talk about Alpine Balsam and how it should be MARPA, a bunch of MARPAs. I've got to talk about the $6 million restrooms next to the courthouse, where the homeless people ripped out one of the toilets for $10,000 and they can't keep the lines clean there. So they have Santa potties on the Pearl Street Mall. This is Boulder. What are we doing here? $6 million for a friggin' restroom that doesn't even work? That was 20 years ago. We paid $6 million for that restroom. For Christ's sake. That's in 6 houses. I went on the transportation department trip today on the bike to look at the capital improvements projects. It sounds like you're doing too much planning and too little action. Okay. John Taylor, he's talking about jobs, housing imbalance.
Lynn, your time is up, but we appreciate your testimony. Next, we have Patrick Murphy, Evan Ravitz, and Sue Prant.
My name is Patrick Murphy. I've lived in Boulder 52 years. The planet burns, floods, and dies while Boulder fiddles with climate change. I repeat it because it's true and it's based on observation of Boulder's past climate mitigation performance, which is often the best indicator of future performance. Boulder climate change leaders are great at talking a good story, but when will they be judged on results rather than smart narratives? How about they publish their budget like the Muni did, thus revealing the true costs that included taking 80 to 60% of the budget from the existing so-called climate change efforts. In other words, not only were 10 years and $30 million lost, Boulder City Council and city manager just went along. The council has changed. The city manager has changed. And the previous top leadership took their money and ran. But the interim leaders left over from the failed Muni now guide the climate action. And surprise, surprise, still lots of talk and little cost benefit analysis. About 50% of the current climate budget is spent just on wages, not actual climate action. Tonight, you'll talk about electric bikes. They're great, But what about the equity filter when you incentivize the purchase of e-bikes? You better have an income-based incentive, otherwise you support the wealthy and not lower income groups. Remember that unless the electricity charging those bikes is linked to solar or wind, it's still the carbon equivalent of burning 44% coal. If you ask for more money for climate change in November and don't have precisely defined actions that have a real cost-benefit analysis and a real equity filter, I'll do everything I can to defeat it. Those who currently support it haven't thought about our past performance. Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick. Now we have Evan Ravitz and Sue Grant.
Good evening. The city may have engaged with communities secretly to co-create the vision of community engagement, but publicly, Council held a real public hearing in 2017, and in spite of unanimous testimony against it, reduced our public comment time from 3 minutes to 2 minutes. A city government that lies to itself has no future.
Evan, were you done?
Yep.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. We will wrap up with Sue Grant.
Hi, I'd like to thank Council for considering an e-bike pilot and a larger program next year with climate tax. Community Cycles is willing to do whatever it takes to make this program happen, either the pilot or the larger program, regardless of if we are contracted to work on it or not. We believe e-bikes will be a game changer for Boulder, especially for those with longer trips. Based on our experience working with the Can Do e-bike pilot program and working in the community for 16 years and getting thousands of bikes out in the community, including over 12,000 bikes given to low-income children and adults, we feel this program will be most successful. Vouchers are given to low-income people and the general public, as we've written in our proposal, and is being done in every similar program in the United States. This will allow us to get more bikes out, reduce overhead costs, and most importantly, achieve the greatest VMT reduction. Our Can Do pilot program awarded 50 e-bikes to low and middle income essential workers that do in-person work. We worked through employers, which allowed us to better connect with the participants. The funding required us to track trips for 2 years. After the initial qualification, we chose participants based on VMT reduction. The majority of participants worked in Boulder, but did not live in Boulder. They were also given a heavy duty lock and accessories. A $250 payment was required to get buy-in to the program. We have found a payment of some level important to participate in all of our programs, including the very low income Earn a Bike program. 50 bikes were given out. 1 was stolen. 2 have been returned because the people didn't use them and wanted their deposit back. 1 has gone missing, presumably sold, which was not permitted, though we have been unable to track down that person. The data, which I've shared with transportation staff, show people are replacing a considerable number of car trips with e-bike trips. I can get into that data more if needed as the program develops. I've also told Boulder Bike Shop owners about participation and support of the potential program. I'm happy to share those comments. I look forward to working with staff and council to do whatever is needed to make this program a success in converting car trips to e-bike trips, reducing VMT and carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue. Okay, that closes our public comment period. So we will now move to the consent agenda.
All right, sir. Tonight's consent agenda, which is item 3 on our agenda, includes items A through G.
And, you know, actually, I jumped ahead of myself a little bit as well. Did staff or council have any comments or follow-up on open comment?
None for me, thanks.
Okay, seeing none. Now we've got the consent agenda. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? And I think, Carl, were we going to have a quick update on the use tables?
We were. Thanks, Mayor. And I would also note that John Gerstle, the planning board chair, is with us this evening as well. to quickly summarize the board's conversation, but Lisa Hood, planner in our office who's been case managing the use tables update, has a short presentation for council. So Lisa.
Thanks, Charles. Good evening, Mayor Brockett and members of the City Council. I'm excited to give a very high-level overview of this draft ordinance before you tonight. This is the Use Table and Standards project that some of you might be familiar with, as it's been going on since 2018. Phase 1 of the project was adopted back in 2019, and we kicked off Phase 2 of the project in 2020. Unfortunately, in the fall of 2020, we had to pause this project due to the staffing level issues around the pandemic, but it's been reinitiated this year. And so we are moving forward with the second phase of the project. So that's been divided into 3 different modules. And what you're seeing tonight is the result of Module 1, or the functional fixes. And so these are really the technical structural updates to the use standards chapter of the land use code, kind of getting things ready for the more substantive updates in modules 2 and module 3, where we'll focus on industrial areas and also neighborhood serving uses. So really focusing on increasing the user friendliness of this really important part of the land use code as we move forward towards the substantive updates. Just a brief reminder on what the initial goals are, since you haven't heard about this project since August 2020. But the initial goals were to simplify and streamline the use standards and table, making them more understandable and legible, and really just creating some more predictability and certainty in the use standards chapter. If you've ever dug into the use table or the standards, you'll know it's a very complicated part of the code. So trying to improve that for people. And we'll dig into the other goals as we get later into the later modules of the project as well. So really brief overview of what the changes are in the draft ordinance tonight. Kind of the overarching change is really improving the structure. A use table is a really helpful tool. It's definitely a best practice in a zoning code. Most modern land use codes or zoning codes have a use table. Ours has become increasingly complex with lots of little changes over time. So anyone who's dealt with it knows that it's pretty difficult to interpret, both from a public perspective and also from staff and council and planning board implementation. So really the biggest goal is to improve the structure. And the approach that we took with this draft ordinance was to take all of the different standards that are related to the many different land uses and put them into one consolidated area. So right now, you'll know that our use table has many different qualifiers with each of these land uses. So things like maximum square footage might be in the actual row of the table. There's also our limited use standards, which are the L with the superscript, where that actually tells you that you need to go to a different table to find out the information that might apply. So generally not a best practice to have to look to 2 different tables for the information that you need. And then we have the conditional use and use review standards, which are scattered in lots of different places of the land use code. So overall, it's pretty difficult and scattered to find the standards that might apply to a specific use. So the main approach is to get those all into one consolidated place, the specific use standards that would follow the use table. An example of this, and it also gives us the opportunity in doing that to consolidate some of the rows and make the table less complicated and shorter. So one of these examples, one of our worst offenders, is the restaurants. There's actually 8 different rows in the use table talking about restaurants, maximum size, things like that, outdoor seating, and all of the different characteristics that would create a different review process. So by taking this approach, we're able to consolidate that into just one row, so one row per use. And importantly, I did want to emphasize that at this point in the project, none of those actual regulations are changing, they're just being moved. So instead of being in the table, they would be in the specific use standard. So we'll dig in more as we get into the later modules to think through those, whether there should be any substantive changes. But at this time, it's just moving those into a different location where it's easier to read and the language has been clarified a bit. We also took a number of other strategies to try to improve the user friendliness based on both staff's work with the use table and difficulties with the use table, the planning board subcommittee that worked from 2018 to 2020 to provide guidance. And then we also had public engagement during 2019, 2020. And then we had a short questionnaire open this spring really trying to get at what the changes are that we could make that would best improve the user friendliness. So we updated the abbreviations that are used in the table to make those more clear and simple, added some signals so that people know when there are standards that apply to a use. We looked through all of the different uses and their definitions and got rid of some of the outdated terminology and outdated uses. Really took this opportunity to look at the definitions that kind of cause the most trouble and try to clarify those and make sure, and also use those definitions as an opportunity to consolidate some of the different rows for very similar uses. We made sure to incorporate use categories in the table so that that's done more consistently and everything's grouped within categories. And then we also made some changes related to those consolidating different rows. And fixing some errors and clarifying some interpretation that changed the cells a bit. And then finally, the seemingly minor things that can have a really major impact, just formatting things related to the use tables, adding colors and shading that will make it a lot easier for most people who are navigating our code in the online version. It'll make it a lot easier for people to understand and navigate that and understand where uses are allowed. So those are all the strategies that we employed in the draft ordinance. We took the ordinance to Planning Board on June 2nd, and they voted unanimously to recommend approval of the ordinance. As Charles said, the chair of the Planning Board, John Gerstle, is here as well if you have questions for him. But that concludes my very brief overview of a long ordinance change. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Lisa. John, would you like to add a few words about Planning Board's thoughts on this?
Sure. I can be brief. I can just say that we had a pretty long session on this matter in Planning Board. And, you know, unusually for Planning Board, we unanimously concluded that staff did a terrific job on this and has succeeded in their objective in terms of changing and simplifying the process that people have to use and keeping the objectives in place. And so I think there was no hesitation on Planning Board's side to unanimously recommend adoption of this.
Great, thanks for that, John. And I will say, I reviewed these changes. They are multitudinous, they're very detailed, and I was very glad to be able to trust the excellent work of staff and the careful reviewing of Planning Board and the unanimous recommendation in order and allow this to move forward. Great, any questions or comments on this item? All right, I would entertain a motion if someone would be so moved.
Move to pass the consent agenda as revised.
Second.
Great. Motion is second. Alicia, what kind of vote we got here?
We have a roll call tonight, sir.
Very good.
All right, we'll start the roll call vote for the consent agenda with Council Member Spear.
Yes.
Wallach,
Aye.
Weiner,
Yes.
Yates,
Yes.
Benjamin,
Yes.
Mayor Brockett,
Yes.
Councilmember Folkerts,
Yes.
and Mayor Pro Tem Friend.
Yes.
Mayor, the consent agenda items A through G is approved unanimously as amended.
Fantastic. And thanks again to planning staff for all the hard work on these tables and look forward to the next phases of that project. All right, we have a public hearing, one public hearing item tonight. So Chris, do you want to introduce?
Yep, Alicia, do you want to introduce the item first or do you want me to go ahead and kick it off?
I'll go ahead and read it into the record first, sir.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Our public hearing is item 5A on tonight's agenda. It is the second reading and consideration of a motion to adopt by emergency measure Ordinance 8517, amending Chapter 8-6, Public Right-of-Way and Easement Encroachments, Revocable Permits, Lease, and Vacations, BRC 1981, by adding a new section 8-6-12, outdoor seating in public right of way and private property, BRC 1981, allowing for a 5-year pilot program that waives certain code requirements and allows outdoor seating through issuance of city revocable permits and amending Chapter 20 fees, BRC 1981, by amending Section 4-20-20, revocable right of way, permit lease application fee, and adding a new section 4-20-76, outdoor seating pilot program infrastructure fees, setting forth applicable fees associated with the 5-year pilot program, and setting forth related details.
Great, thanks, Alicia. And it's my pleasure to introduce Chris Jones, our Interim Director of Community Vitality, who's going to walk us through this presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Alicia. Good evening, Council. Hopefully you are about to see my screen. Is everyone seeing a presentation?
Yep.
Great. Well, if the length of Alicia's introduction is any indication of the amount of work that's been going on since the last time I was here to provide an update on outdoor dining program, I think you have an idea of how busy we have all been in getting ready for you all this evening. I'm delighted to be here, and while again be doing most of the talking, we have a number of folks on the call at the ready to help answer questions. While you are here for your second reading of the proposed ordinance change, I also want to use this opportunity to give you an update on our outdoor dining pilot program. But first, we'll provide a background on how we got to where we are today. We have a couple of questions for Council for your discussion as well. I'll provide an overview of the pilot program. We're anticipating that there are business owners that are listening in this evening and they're wanting as early a preview as possible of what we've been cooking up. We, of course, then have the proposed ordinance 8517 for your consideration, and we'll talk a little bit about what that, how that relates. Then we have some next steps contingent on your approval of the ordinance change, and then time for questions and discussion. So as a quick review, this work began back in May of 2020 in the early days of the pandemic, when the city created our Boulder Business Recovery Program that enabled businesses to expand outside to help offset their indoor capacity limits. With that, we pursued the closure of the west end to vehicle traffic. We rerouted the hop on Pearl Street in the downtown. We also implemented a number of curbside pickup zones for restaurants that were taking advantage of more pickup, takeout, delivery operations. In October of 2020, we extended the program with some modifications to include winter provisions. Then the following year, September of 2021, we presented an agenda item to Council that explored the extension of emergency orders through April of this year, and some considerations around the future of the program beyond emergency orders. Those orders were extended, and Council communicated support for a downtown pilot program. In February of this year, we provided an information item to City Council that explored a downtown-based outdoor dining proposal, and that led to a number of questions and concerns from many stakeholders on the topic. Then in March, we brought to you a proposal for a $250,000 ARPA budget item in the ATB as part of a business recovery proposal that Council approved. And in March, we also extended the emergency orders through August of this year, knowing that we're still having impacts from COVID, and it did help provide us more time to prepare this pilot program for you. In April, we came to Council and sought direction on moving forward with a citywide pilot program, and also got direction from Council on pursuing these ordinance changes that you're considering this evening. Now we're in June. You've done your first reading. We're at our second reading of the proposed ordinance changes that will establish our pilot program. So the questions that we have for you tonight, other than hopefully approving the ordinance changes, is do you have any questions about the pilot program rules that were included as right now they're called the draft pilot program guidelines, but those will be used to generate a city manager rule. And do you have any questions about our next steps moving forward? For folks listening in tonight, an overview of the pilot program. I'm going to touch base on a number of things, including the considerations that we included in the creation of the program, the scope of the program, the businesses that are eligible to participate. I'll describe some requirements around our approved infrastructure, associated fees, subsidies that we have available for participating businesses, what the application process will look like for businesses, and then again, regulatory considerations related to the ordinance changes. I'm not going to read through all these, but again, the 4 areas of consideration for the creation of the pilot program are safety, accessibility, equity, and operations. The scope of our program is citywide. We're proposing a 5-year program that would begin on September 1st or whenever the emergency orders end and would expire on October 31st of 2027. The eligibility for the program is in the public right-of-way, primarily on-street parking spaces, some areas of the Pearl Street Mall bricks, as well as other sidewalks and available open spaces. The program will also apply to private property, including parking spaces on private property and other open spaces. The businesses that are eligible for participate in the program are restaurants, brew pubs, taverns, wineries, and distilleries. They need to have available public right-of-way on private property or public right-of-way within 150 feet of their entrances or directly fronting the building that they are located within. Some of the requirements of the approved infrastructure that we've been pursuing is on the size front, the businesses would be allowed to participate at no more than 500 square feet and 100 square feet minimum for any participating business. We are also requiring steel planter boxes that are filled to be surrounding any of the outdoor extensions that are adjacent to travel lanes. There needs to be a minimum 3-foot height surrounding barrier that can also be no more than 4-foot high maximum. And then no vertical elements will be allowed to extend beyond that barrier, except for things like umbrellas, propane heaters, or other support elements for shading and planters. We are requiring that the infrastructure be modular so that it can be quickly removed in the event of an emergency or another use of the public right-of-way. The infrastructure, obviously, if needs to be alcohol licensing compliant, if restaurants or establishments are wanting to serve alcoholic beverages. We are not proposing to allow any closed-in structures or roofs, and also no tie-ins to electrical service in the extensions in parking spaces and beyond. And of course, all of the facilities need to be ADA accessible. We use these guidelines to do a request for proposal process to solicit possible vendors that could be a part of our pre-reviewed or approved vendors that businesses could choose from to expedite the permitting process. We have identified Mod Street out of Durango as our vendor for our citywide bulk purchase proposal, and I'll talk more about that shortly. We've also identified Western Precision Manufacturing out of Grand Junction and Architrac out of Montana as additional vendors that restaurants can choose from to expedite their permitting process. Those second 2 vendors do not offer up the city-approved planter boxes, and so we would still need to work with businesses who want to pursue those options to make sure that they have the city-approved planter boxes if they're adjacent to vehicle traffic. The fee for participation in the pilot program, there's the initial application fee that's consistent with our pre-existing revocable permit fees. Once the fee has been signed and approved, there's an annual fee. This is consistent again with our existing revocable permit fee. On the mall, on the bricks, it is $18.76 per square foot. and extensions off the mall in the public right-of-way is $13.13 per square foot. If businesses also want to participate in the bulk city purchase program, there's an additional infrastructure fee on the mall of $16.25 per square foot, and off the mall, $21.87 per square foot. If businesses want to serve alcoholic beverages, there still, of course, would be the liquor licensing fees that apply as usual. We also have 3 subsidy options available to participating businesses. Option A is for businesses that are extending into the public right-of-way but do not want to participate in the city's bulk purchase program. We will reimburse up to $2,500 of their infrastructure costs if they're able to demonstrate that they've invested private dollars in outdoor dining infrastructure prior to the creation of this pilot program. Option B is for businesses, again, that are extending in the public right-of-way, but they want to participate in the pilot program. And the fees that we have associated with that are reflective of up to a 50% discount in their total infrastructure costs. Option C is for extensions on private property. Those businesses are not eligible to participate in the bulk purchase program, but they will still be eligible for the $2,500 grant if they can demonstrate that they've invested their own dollars in infrastructure prior. Real quick, I'm not going to read through all these steps, but the application process for businesses, first thing they need to be doing is preparing their materials. And so we've listed that, and we've been working on communications of all the different elements that will be required as part of the application. Once they've gotten those materials together, they'll submit their application online, upload their documents, and once that's fully processed, they'll receive a confirmation email that their revocable permit is in process. They'll need to then watch for email updates to let them know if there's any additional information that's required to complete their application. And then they'll get updates on when it's ready for different steps for payment, and eventually when the permit's ready for signature. Once the permit's prepared and ready for signature, and it is fully signed and recorded, that is when businesses will be able to use that documentation to apply for their liquor license moving forward with the program. So this all relates back to the proposed ordinance 8517 that really provides the framework for the pilot program by temporarily waiving certain code requirements to allow for outdoor seating, and it sets forth the associated fees. Elisha did a much better job of explaining all the different elements that the ordinances are touching, so we'll refer back to that when you're ready. But the detailed requirements of the program are included in the pilot program guidelines that were attached to the memo, and those are being proposed for implementation as part of a city manager rule. The ordinance automatically expires at the end of the 5-year term unless council extends it by another ordinance. We're recommending that the ordinance be adopted by emergency tonight to ensure that the pilot program is up and running prior to the expiration of the current emergency order at the end of August. Contingent on council's approval this evening, we will then pursue our communication strategy. We'll do a press release to let the community know that this is moving forward. We've already developed a website that we've been drafting, and it'll be ready to go live very shortly. We are preparing an email notification to all businesses that are currently participating in the extensions program. And then we'll include information in city newsletters and work with our partners at the Boulder Chamber and the Downtown Boulder Partnership to make sure that we're able to notify all eligible businesses of this opportunity for the pilot program. As far as next steps go, beyond the emergency order this evening, the adoption by emergency this evening, we are proposing that the application period begin next Monday and would continue through July 15th. Beyond that, businesses that are participating will have 2 phases for transition of their outdoor dining infrastructure. Phase 1 would be for any businesses that are participating and they have submitted and received their revocable permit. They will need to reduce the extension of the footprint of their extensions to the space that is detailed in their permit. If businesses do not want to participate in the pilot program, they have until the end of the emergency orders to remove any extensions that they have in the public right-of-way. Phase 2 for businesses that are participating in the program, they will have until the end of October to transition into the city-approved modular infrastructure, or if they don't want to have outdoor dining during the winter, even if they have their permit, will have until the spring or whenever they would like to transition to their infrastructure, as long as there's nothing out in the public right-of-way that's not compliant over the winter. Of course, if businesses are no longer participating in the program, they will have fully returned to their pre-pandemic operations by August 31st. After that, we will have an annual application period for any new businesses that want to participate in the pilot program, and that will take place from February 1st through March 1st every year. And that is our really quick overview of our proposed pilot program. And now want to ask council if they have any questions of staff before discussion.
Thanks so much for that, Chris. Really appreciate all the work that you and the other departments have done on this and that great presentation. So we'll do council questions from council and then go to our public hearing. Matt.
Oh, perfect. Let me get my notes in order. There we go. Well, thank you, Chris. It is herding cats and an immense amount of work to get all these pieces in a line. So thank you for all the work to get us to this place and certainly transition out of the temporary emergency orders into something that is a little more wholesome and with more deliberate intent going forward. So I really appreciate that. I have a couple of questions about some of the pieces that were sort of brought up. One has to do with sort of a question about the no electrical in sort of that modular area. And the reason I ask is in regards to outdoor dining at night. You know, some current establishments have strung lights, and that allows there to, one, for safety, but also for the enjoyment of the space. And so I'm wondering, how do we reconcile outdoor dining at night in order to maintain an actual safe environment, but also one that people can sort of enjoy and view? So that was a question. I have two more after that. So I don't know if you want to tackle them one at a time or if I give you all three at once.
I'm writing them down. So if you want to give me all three at once, then I will tackle them one at a time, or call on others to help answer.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Chris. The other question I have is, you know, based on that timeline, I think it certainly seems very reasonable for those that want to participate in the process that, you know, come August 31st, if they're committed, they're looking to go forward, they can sort of hold it, they can transition. I'm curious about the restaurants that currently have an outdoor dining setup, sort of within the emergency orders, are probably not going to embark on submitting for a permit, but then being forced. Are they forced to remove all of their outdoor dining by August 31st is really my question. And if so, because that's what it seemed to be, that seems like an odd time to pull the rug out when there's still another month and a half of really good time for them to still utilize the space and infrastructure they've invested in to make that money before outdoor dining wanes, and then make a clean break when outdoor dining is sort of, you know, at its perhaps lowest point. So I'm curious about the timing of that transition. And then my third question is maybe less of a question and more of a recommendation. So I think I'll save that till after public comment. So really just two questions.
Sure. Thank you, Matt, for those questions. So first on the electrical, I'll speak first, and I wonder if folks from Planning and Development Services might want to chime in a little bit more. In the guidelines, more explicitly, we're saying no above ground electrical extensions. Right now, we have got people who've put conduit that is within arm's reach of anybody who's walking by at any time of day. It's quite it's not best practices when it comes to a safety perspective. And then we have other folks that have tied into outlets that are they're not paying for the power, but they happen to have an outlet coming out of a tree well adjacent to their parklet, and so they're tapping into power that the city's probably paying for. And so in light of that, acknowledging that yes, there certainly are considerations once it gets dark, there are other ways to create some ambient lighting that other communities have demonstrated an ability to still create an ambiance without actually having power from the adjacent property into the space. And so I don't know that we've prohibited that outright, whether it's through some sort of battery, solar powered infrastructure. But as far as above ground power lines into these spaces, we are currently recommending that it not be allowed. And I see Edward turned his camera on, and I'm not sure if he wants to provide any more context.
You did well on that one. I don't have anything else to add.
And so then, thank you, Edward. Related to the next question, Matt, on the August 31st, it's the end of the emergency orders. And as we're transitioning into, if we're not under emergency order, the use of the public right-of-way comes at a cost for anybody. And so the question would be is, would we want to turn a blind eye to folks who are out of compliance, right? So even if they don't pick up their infrastructure by the end of the emergency orders, and they have not pursued a revocable permit for the use of the public right-of-way, are we not going to enforce our standard rules that we're asking everybody else to abide by when it comes to the use of public right-of-way? And I see Sandra, did you turn your camera on to opine on that as well?
You did great, Chris. I don't think I really have anything to add.
Right. Matt, does that answer your questions?
Yeah, I'll have more follow-up when we get to discussion on the back end, but thanks for that. I appreciate it, Chris.
Great. We have Mark, Nicole, and Lauren.
Good evening, Chris. Thank you for the presentation. A couple of questions. One, there's a large community conversation that's going on with respect to the ultimate use of West Pearl. I assume this is separate and apart from any determination as to what we do with West Pearl.
Yes, that is correct.
All right. My next question is, we have different rates of charges for facilities on the bricks and off the bricks. Does the data support, in terms of gross sales per foot, does it support a higher rental on the mall than elsewhere? Are they doing that well, that's an appropriate thing to do?
Thanks for the question, Mark. I'm not sure that is the consideration that we went through whenever those rates were established, which was long before this current pilot program, where there's a different rate for on the bricks than off the bricks. I don't know that that is the consideration. I don't know if anybody else knows. Maybe Edward, you know the consideration for why. I have some ideas, but I don't want to make assumptions.
I can certainly chime in for a moment here. So those rates are based upon what has been set in ordinance in chapter 4-20 for many years. And it was presumed that there was a higher value for that land on the bricks than for other places throughout Boulder in terms of what the lease rate could be. Theoretically, that number is set based upon market lease rates. It has been a number of years since it's had a thorough evaluation. It's probably should be up in the next few years to look at to see if that number should be adjusted further. But that was the premise behind it, is that the lease rates on the bricks in that particular portion of Boulder are higher than in other areas throughout the city.
Well, I'm raising the issue because lease rates are one thing, profitability is another thing, and I'm just curious as to whether the higher lease rates, the higher rates for the facilities on the bricks are really warranted in light of the performance of people who've engaged in those higher leases. And let me roll that into another question, which is there's almost an arbitrariness, it seems, to some of these rates. I mean, why are we at $113 for a reapplication? I mean, what's the magic of 113 or $18.76 for the right of way? It just seems, where does it all come from?
So those particular fees, which actually come from what we have in the existing revocable program, are based on the lease piece in terms of the recovery of the potential value. The application fees, the reapplication fees, are based upon the estimate of staff time necessary to process the applications and to be able to have cost recovery to what had been previously agreed to. And I believe the revocable program is generally a 50-50, although I'd have to look back on the cost recovery, which is based upon policy that was set 1994, I think, was where that document starts with the definitions. It's been some time. But so we have just continued that recommendation in this program from where the revocable program has been for some time. If we were to want to look further into that, we would have to suggest that as part of a larger fee study. We will, in Planning and Development Services in the next couple of years, be taking on a more comprehensive review of fees to ensure that we are doing the proper cost recovery. And this would be one that would be considered at a future date.
And just so that I understand, resubmittal of the application, is that if the original application is somehow deficient?
Correct. If for some reason the information they submit is insufficient, it's missing items. In revocables, it is very rare for us to actually charge that fee, but it is in there in case there's more significant work and a second round of review to be done.
Okay, and my last question is, if an option is taken in which we, the city, installs and stores the infrastructure, are we also responsible for its condition?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Nicole and Lauren.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and bringing us to a conclusion here. My question is around the storage of the infrastructure. If we were to choose that option, I mean, that seems like a really large amount of stuff to store. So I'm just curious about practically, where does that go? Who's involved in that setup, takedown, storage process, and what kind of staff time are we talking about there? Because that feels like a really intense thing, depending on how many people are signed up.
Sure. Thank you for that question. It's a really good question. So we actually have a continuing services agreement with a moving company that is already on board to manage all of the pickup and removal of any of the infrastructure that is under our responsibility. So we're gonna need to wait and see what businesses come out of the woodwork and want to participate in the bulk purchase program to understand the total scale of it for sure. But the great thing about the modular infrastructure, it is designed to be picked up and stored in a very relatively smaller amount of space. And so we do have space available to the city. We don't know the exact scale until we have applications come in to know just how much space we're going to be looking for. But we have been thinking very diligently about that and are going to be covering those bases once we know more from businesses.
Okay, thanks. So it sounds like it would be kind of an outside company that's responsible for doing some of the movement, and we do have space available for storing within the city. Okay, thank you.
Correct.
Thanks, Nicole. Lauren?
Thank you. So my first question is about the length of the lease, the length of the approval for the revocable permit. It looks like it's 3 years and the lease for the equipment is 5. And so I was just wondering why those things don't match and what someone would do if they're signed into a 5-year lease and lose their revocable permit.
That's a good question. Sandra, I'm not sure if you want to take the 3-year.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. So the lease of the infrastructure is going to be aligned with the revocable permit term. So the initial permit term would be 3 years less 1 day. And then any subsequent lease would also mirror those same term dates. So the idea is that it gives the city an opportunity to look and see how things are going, and if there are conditions that need to be added to the permit, if there are issues that arise as a result of the use, then we can try and address them at that point, rather than doing a full 5-year term. And the other reason is that it is a 3-year term is under the authority of the city manager, so they wouldn't have to go through council as well. So anything over or 3 years and greater needs to go through council.
And
Okay.
just to add real quickly, so while it's a 5-year pilot program, we'll still be doing the leases in the 2-year, 364-day terms, but folks will be able to renew at the standard renewal rate as long as the program's in effect. And so presumably by the time we're getting to 3 years into the program, we'll know more and we'll continue to work with council to possibly extend.
Great, thank you. I was also wondering about, and also like after looking at sort of the preferred provider, one of the things that I noticed is that an opaque fence at 4 feet tall is pretty tall if you're seated in an area. And so I was just wondering how you guys came up with, it's like people are pretty hidden behind it. And one of the things that appeals to me is having, bringing life to the street with this program. And so I'm a little curious. I know that for the liquor license, we need a 3-foot barrier, and why we're allowing up to 4.
So you're exactly right in the sense that our alcohol licenses require the 3-foot barrier. And so instead of prescribing specifically 3 foot for everyone, that's why we proposed a maximum, because there are examples in other places where folks go higher than 4 feet. And so wanting to put a limit on that for the very reason that you described, we certainly still have time to revise that downward if that's the will of council. We just wanted to provide some level of flexibility on that front for participating businesses.
Thank you. I just had a couple more. This one's probably for Edward Stafford, and I was just wondering if you could summarize maybe if there are any areas where the parklet is more restrictive than our current outdoor dining program, or if basically everything that we're proposing right now is essentially in line with what is at least as permissive as our current outdoor dining program.
Thinking through all the things we put together, I would say there's nothing in this that comes to mind that is more restrictive than the current program. And for most aspects, this is certainly less restrictive. Number of different provisions everywhere from land use code to process that have been modified or loosened in this, but can't think of any specific one that would be more onerous. The existing program is still an option. And in fact, for all the rest of the year, when the application window for this isn't open, people could still do the existing program with the types of patios that they had also.
Thank you. And then my last question is, you mentioned that after 3 years, we might want to, that we didn't want to lease space for more than 3 years because there might be things that we notice, things we want to adjust. Is there currently a plan for evaluating this program at any interval as we go forward, or sort of collecting data around issues that we think might arise or success, like what do we have in terms of what kind of information we might collect from this to base decisions on moving forward?
Thank you for the question, Lauren. We have not specifically written in any requirements around evaluation into the ordinance language. I have no doubt that we are going to be talking about outdoor dining. I mean, let's how many decades? Anyhow, so it's a great question. We have not proposed writing any evaluation rules but it's something that we can certainly consider for the city manager rules and be more explicit in our next update with you all on this topic.
That's it for my questions. Thank you guys so much for all the work you've put into this.
Thanks, Lauren. Not seeing any other council questions. Let's go ahead and open the public hearing. And we have one person signed up who has participated in the open comments. So Ryan, maybe we can skip rereading the guidelines.
Sounds like a plan.
Very good. So our one person signed up is Lynn Siegel. So if we could bring Lynn on, and Lynn, you will have 3 minutes to speak.
3 whole minutes. Oh my gosh. That would be good for public comment, wouldn't it? So if you're going to do a deal with the city manager on annexation at 390 Arapahoe, and that they can do cash in lieu if she decides that's okay outside of the annexation agreement, that is helping a developer. You are helping a lot of developers by this, keeping these hours in this pilot program downtown. So I'd say, yeah, the pandemic, let's just, this is stating the obvious, taught us a lot of things that we should have done decades ago. You know, like work at home when you can, stuff like that. And this is one of them, opening the mall and stuff up. But I'd say I want to leverage it because the city manager has far too much power if they are allowed to violate our affordable housing on site and say cash in lieu just because they decide to, they feel like it. That is unacceptable. That is stunning to me. And that is something I certainly wonder about what happened with Brew House, the affordable housing there with 9 parking spaces for car share in trade for 300 parking spaces plus at 311 Mapleton as a subsidy at 311. So when you, as city council, allow these kind of things to happen, you erode the trust of the public. And it makes me want to say no on things that should be done, like the West Pearl area for opening it up on this pilot program. So think about that. Just think about that a little bit. Because I think you'd rather that I'm up here singing your praises and being real optimistic than negative. But I'm saying there's kind of some reasons for me being negative. And I've been around here, for 30 years doing this. And yet these new people that are on staff, today on this capital improvements bike tour with transportation, one person knew me by my voice, but she didn't know what I looked like. Interesting, isn't it? Isn't it so interesting that I don't know who's at this meeting. I don't have a clue. I don't know my community anymore because of the pandemic. Come on, people, let's get off of it. Get off your high horses, put on the videos, grow up.
Your time is up. Thank you for your testimony. Okay, that closes the public hearing. So who would like to kick off council discussion of the matter before us? Everybody's a little slow to be the first today on our items. There we go, Tara, then Matt.
I want to say, Chris, thank you so much. I want to thank you for the in-depth work that you and your department have done, for all the options you've given the businesses, and for that reimbursement program. So that's all I really want to say is thank you. How do you like that? That's it.
Thank you, Tara.
Nice. Matt?
Well, Terry, you sort of set me up on that one. Anyway, so I just wanted to follow up on a question I had, but actually I'll switch order. Lauren brought up an interesting point about whether or not there were some plans to sort of check in, and I'd like to maybe go a step further, because one thing that I'm still somewhat uncomfortable with, although I'm going to be okay to some extent, is that we're still it's a 5-year program, yet we're still calling it a pilot, and that's a pretty long runway. And also that it automatically sunsets. I'm uncomfortable with the idea that a program that we're investing in, business services are investing in, can just sort of evaporate by council ignoring it. It just sunsets on itself. I'd like there to be a more deliberate action to choose to end it. And so in light of not messing with that overall cadence, I'd like to recommend that in 2 years, we actually do have a check-in where we actually more formally evaluate its pilot status. I think in 2 years, we would know sufficiently well whether this is successful or it's not. And at that point, we can just make it permanent and finish off that anything that's out there. I don't know if we need 5 years to totally determine its pilot status and if it's successful or not. So I would just see if we can check in a little sooner in that sense. That'd be something I'd love to recommend and see if any of my council colleagues are interested in adding that. The other piece is kind of back in line to that cadence with people with outdoor dining, but not looking to permit a part of the permanent program and being sort of told to clear house while outdoor dining is still in peak for probably another month or so. I know that there's a compliance issue, but I'd be interested in seeing, since we're passing this on emergency, and if it passes, it becomes law tonight, that anybody who has outdoor dining as of today is just given that ability to extend out to August 31st and not have to clean up. We can continue all the permitting process, all the things to get people into the program. I just think it's an odd time to tell people to pull the rug out when they've already established their business practices to leverage the outdoor dining and leverage the amount of people that are enjoying the good weather and make money and continue to make themselves more whole on the backside of the pandemic. So I just think from a timing, I'd love to just kick it a little bit so that it's on the natural wane of outdoor dining. The weather is more crummy. And that's a natural time to clear up and then get ready for winter and then make your decisions from there. So those are two things I'd like to sort of see if my council colleagues are interested in, and if there's any certainly concerns from staff on either of those pieces.
So Matt, thanks for that point of clarity. I think I heard you say extend it to August 31st, but I think you meant past maybe?
I think I meant to say October 31st, because that was a date in the slide as sort of a transition period. And again, I'd love to see people who are not looking to go to the permanent program get rid of all their outdoor dining and return it to pre-pandemic when outdoor dining is no longer that popular and it's naturally waning, and they're not going to be losing a lot of business as a result of pulling it out when the weather is still perfect and awesome for outdoor dining as we expect at the end of August.
Got it. Well, if you don't mind me picking up on that again, Chris, could you address a mechanism, do you know, by which we might be able to do that tonight? Is that something that is doable as part of this work we're doing tonight?
That's a good question. I might defer back to Sandra if she has any thoughts on available paths forward. I would also indicate that the intention would be that once emergency orders end, that's the date that we had set with alcohol permits, alcohol licenses. So there's a number of considerations that would then trigger. And I'm seeing Sandra and Michonne turn their cameras on. So while I totally understand and appreciate the thinking, there are a number of things that would still make this very challenging, not just by an order of the city. If we were to extend emergency orders through the end of October, businesses would still need to go through a whole new renewal process to get compliant with the state.
I'm glad Michonne is on so she can address the alcohol issues, but I do think that there are a lot of administrative issues here that would be really a big hurdle to overcome. And I think, Chris mentioned this before. I think that there is an equity issue here as well, because we have all these folks that are doing a lot of work to get into compliance with our code and follow the procedures and regulations that we have put in place. And then you'll have a group of folks that will just continue doing what they're doing and basically get a free pass. And so I think there's some issues there, but I think also just from a practical perspective, it's going to be an administrative burden, a big, large one to overcome. And I think Michonne probably has some more specific information related to alcohol licensing.
Yeah, so for city licensing, a 2-month extension, if that were all it was of current outdoor dining areas where they're serving alcohol, what that would mean is that we essentially would need to take 32 applications again, post them again, approve them for only 2 months, And then we would need to take additional applications for a longer period of time. It also strikes me that there are some outdoor locations which overlap block faces for other liquor licensees, which are larger than the size that they eventually will be allowed to be. And that could inhibit their next door neighbors from coming into compliance because those locations are still there and they don't intend to participate in the pilot program. So at least for city licensing, we've done 4 freights or 4 bulks of postings, processing, sending them down to the state, getting them back from the state. What this would mean is instead of getting everybody into compliance for people that wanted to participate in the pilot program, we would need to do a temporary one, and immediately on its heels, we would need to do a permanent one in addition. So that would be very difficult for my office.
And Michonne, could you introduce yourself, please?
Oh, I apologize. I'm Michonne Cook. I'm the licensing manager with the city, and we do the liquor licensing. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Okay. Thanks for following that up, that information. And I think we can now go to Mark and then Bob.
With our summer break looming, I will be extremely brief. I agree with Matt on the 2-year check-in, and I agree with Tara in terms of being very grateful for the work that you've done and your folks have done, Chris. This is really excellent, so thank you. That's all I got.
Great. Bob?
Well, first of all, I'll start off by echoing Mark. I'm grateful to you, Chris, for the tremendous work that you've done with CHIP and with the downtown merchants and with so many other constituents, and of course your colleagues in the various cities departments. So great presentation, great product here. I think we're going to prove this tonight. I do agree with Matt that I think a 2-year check-in makes some sense, and if somebody could just calendar that would be great. I do have one kind of question I probably should have asked before during question time. Chris, I know we're not talking about West Pearl tonight, and we won't, but I'm just trying to understand just mechanically how things are going to work. So we're going to have presumably some restaurants that are located on West Pearl who may opt into this program and some that may opt out. Those who opt in, they're modular units, whether they bring their own or rent or buy them or rent them from the city. Those will be in the parking spaces, or where will they actually go? Because we're not scheduled to have a West Pearl traffic discussion until September 8th, but this goes into effect on August 31. So I'm just trying to figure out how the timing of that works.
That's a really good question, Bob. So the restaurants on West Pearl will be subject to the same design guidelines as any other business, other than restaurants on the bricks who do have a little bit of a different rule because of just the nature of the infrastructure there. And so by the end of August 31st, any restaurants on the West End that want to participate in the pilot program will need to have edited their footprint down to their revocable permit footprint. So that's the rub. They don't have to have their infrastructure in place yet, their modular infrastructure. We will have a window available through the end of October for them to upgrade their infrastructure, or wait till next spring to put in the upgraded infrastructure. But as far as their revocable permit goes, they'll need to edit their existing outdoor dining footprint to whatever they've proposed in their longer term revocable permit.
That's great, Chris. That's real helpful. And for those that are on West Pearl, as opposed to maybe 10th Street, where there's maybe a little bit more space, I know the sidewalks are pretty narrow on West Pearl between 11th and 9th. Will those, if you could foreshadow for us, will those that participate tend to put their infrastructure in the parking spaces? Is that kind of what you're thinking of along there? Because I know the sidewalks aren't all that wide. Correct. Yes. Okay, that's great. And so it sounds like the timing of this is going to work out really nice, because you're going to know, presumably by the end of August, or maybe even by mid-July. It sounds like the application deadline is mid-July. You're going to know going into that September 8th council discussion how many restaurants opted in and what their footprints are going to look like and what the map's going to look like, and that'll help you kind of inform us and maybe advise us what to do in West Pearl. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes.
Great. Good plan. Good timing.
Although we weren't supposed to talk about the West Pearl closure.
We did not talk about West Pearl. I was just asking some questions.
If I were a better singer, I'd sing "We Don't Talk About West Pearl" to the tune of the Encanto song. But
thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Bob. Nicole.
Yeah, I just have a question. I just wanted to thank you all for attempting to use the racial equity tool in this decision-making process. And I just want to name that it feels a little uncomfortable for me that we're kind of taking these steps while admitting that we didn't quite get enough input from people of color in our community to really understand what potential impact it has. And I guess I sort of come from the default perspective that if we're not actively making a positive difference for racial equity, we are risking going in the other direction. And I guess I'm wondering, as we move forward with this, where are those other check-in points where we can communicate with communities of color and figure out where that component fits into this this plan? Is it in sort of the people who are benefiting from outdoor dining? I mean, how do we try to get a sense of that? Because I don't know. It's not sitting well with me. But I do appreciate the attempt to use it. Just want to thank you for that.
Thank you, Nicole. And if you don't mind, I will speak to the question there. We do have a number of other processes that are going on that are much more in tune with getting broad community input. There's the Downtown Vision Plan being led by CHIP and the Downtown Boulder Partnership. And so we have shared with them the racial equity instrument and our communication and engagement guidelines with an expectation that they are followed. And I know on the economic vitality front, we are getting ready to update our economic sustainability strategy. And that too will have opportunity and I dare say expectation that we have broader community input in some of those more policy driving efforts to make sure that diverse voices are heard in that. I just say in the nature of trying to stand up a program in pretty short order, it does make it challenging to have a broad, widely inclusive community engagement process that we've done in earnest. We could have reached out to more people, and we can still do that as part of our ongoing conversations. That's why it's a pilot, is that there is a presumption that we are going to need to make adjustments to respond to different community needs in the years ahead. And so we can still continue to listen. We just haven't, in using the tool right now in this rapid format, it just did not provide us with that.
Thank you for that. And, I think if we are to make the decision to move forward with a check-in place, this is something that would be wonderful to check in on at that interim stage.
Thanks for that, Nicole. I'll just call on myself briefly and say again, echo the thanks for everyone done a great deal of really high quality work. And I really appreciate everything it's taken to get us here. I'm certainly supportive. I like the idea of the 2-year check-in, so we might include that in a motion to give direction to that effect. And Matt, I appreciate Matt's point about, hey, can we extend things for a little while? But I heard the complexities from Chris and Sandra and Michonne, and so I don't want to create a great deal of work for staff for something so short. So I appreciate Matt raising the issue, but doesn't sound like necessarily the way to move forward. All right, anybody else have any comments or a motion?
I'll give it a shot.
All right.
All right. I'd like to make a motion to adopt by emergency measure ordinance 8517, amending chapter 8-6 of public right-of-way and easement encroachments, revocable permits, lease and vacations, of the Boulder Revised Code of 1981 by adding a new section 8-6-12, outdoor seating in public rights of way and private property for Boulder Revised Code 1981, allowing for a 5-year pilot program that waives certain code requirements and allows outdoor seating through issuance of city revocable permits, and amending Chapter 20, Fees of Boulder Revised Code 1981 by amending Section 4-20-20, Revocable Right-of-Way Permit/Lease Application Fee of the Boulder Revised Code 1981, and adding a new Section 4-20-76, Outdoor Seating Pilot Infrastructure Fee for Boulder Revised Code 1981, setting forth applicable fees associated with the 5-year pilot program and setting forth related details, with the amendment to add a 2-year check-in from the date of the passage of this motion.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion is second. Any additional discussion? All right, seeing none, let's go to a vote. And this is a roll call.
That is correct, sir. We'll start this vote for ordinance 8517 with Councilmember Wallach.
Aye.
Weiner,
Yes.
Yates,
Yes.
Benjamin,
Yes.
Mayor Brockett,
Yes.
Councilmember Folkerts,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Friend,
Yes.
and Councilmember Spear.
Yes.
Mayor, the ordinance 8517 as read into the record and amended is hereby approved unanimously.
Great, thanks so much, Alicia. And we didn't mention this before, but as an emergency ordinance, it did require a 2/3 passage, but we leapt right past that into unanimous. So Chris and team, thanks again. Thanks so much for all your outstanding work on this.
Thank you very much. Onward.
And upward. Alicia, can you take us to our next item, please?
Yes, sir, of course. Tonight's next item, which is item number 6 on the agenda, matters from the city manager. 6A is the Boulder Fire Rescue Department's 2020 Master Plan Progress Report.
Great, and it's my pleasure to introduce Chief Calderazzo, who is here to present this item. I think both of our deputy chiefs are here from our fire rescue department as well. So Mike, feel free to take it away.
Great, thank you, Chris. I'm hoping you can hear me all right. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Mike Calderazzo, Fire Chief. I'm hoping we can get the slideshow up. We got a little brief slideshow to share. What we wanted to do for Council this evening was actually fulfill a requirement of accreditation, but more importantly, to share progress on our master plan, and then if need be, get feedback and direction on our areas of focus. You may recall that right before COVID hit and shut us down, we had come in front of Council to get the master plan accepted. And right before that, we had gotten our accreditation recommendations from the group that came to visit us. And one of them was the recommendation to get in front of our elected officials and facilitate further planning and discussion efforts on an annual basis. I realize it hasn't quite been annual, but what we're sharing with you tonight is really the culmination of a lot of hard work and a lot of folks in the department in presenting this update. And we hope that you'll see that despite COVID, we've actually been able to do quite a few things since the acceptance of the master plan in 2020. So if we can go to the next slide, share with you some items of note in the interim since the master plan was approved. This gives on the left here a little overview of the call volume, which has been relatively about the same amount. That's a breakdown of the different types of calls, but you can see that EMS definitely dominates and has always dominated our call volume. But in the interim space, I think COVID speaks for itself. We've had a number of incidents of note. There's been things like the People's, we called it the Sellers Park fire at the time, but The People's Crossing fire is actually a small fire that could have quickly become something quite big. They jumped on it fast, but had some other incidents of note, such as the Pearl Street fire. And then the latest fire of note at 190 acres was the NCAR fire. But all of this, our team weathered. It's been doing a pretty good job, I think, and the community as well has had to endure all of these things. I think that should be noted as well. If we could go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the 4 areas. So there were really 4 different areas that our master plan asked us to focus on. 2 of those, the first 2 I'll go into, are actually outward facing or community facing, I would call them. And then the latter 2 are more about giving the tools to the team and taking care of the team. So you'll see that as we go through it. And that's really what we wanted to share with you is progress in those 4 different areas. And you will note some areas that we've given extra attention to, particularly around this first commitment. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll share with you some of the information that we have on that. The first commitment was really about speeding up response. And I know that it's basically saying better and faster all hazards response. What the conversations we've had around emergency medical care in particular are about improving the response times of advanced level medical care responders. That's part of the advanced life support, but basically doing that in all hazards. So it's not just about EMS, but in every aspect, as we'll talk about a little bit. So we can go to the next slide. I'll share with you details on each of these areas. So the 2 on the left, the 2 graphics on the left speak to the EMS piece, particularly advanced life support, what we've been able to do in the last years. As a matter of fact, this year, we've been able to bring on board someone who can really move our advanced life support capabilities forward. And what that basically means is we're looking to upskill is probably a terrible word, but upgrade the skills of the responders on all of the fire apparatus so that they turn into basically what we equate the skill level from ambulances, they'd be on the fire trucks as well. So we'd have way more of those in the system. And by doing so, reduce the response time for that advanced level care. And so we currently have 7 paramedics on the job, and we've put 3 this year in paramedic school, and our new supervisor in that realm, our EMS program person, their job is to help us move that forward. Our goal is to at least improve the response level of 1, if not 2, of our fire apparatus early next year, once we get these other folks out of paramedic school. Cardiac survival is also a master plan goal. So the advanced life support was about reducing response times for advanced life support and bringing it down to what we see for all hazards. So the first unit that gets to your side as close to 6 minutes as we can needs to have those advanced level responders. That's the master plan goal. The other piece is cardiac survival. So if in the unfortunate event of a cardiac event, we want somebody to walk out of the hospital almost as if that had never happened. That's kind of the goal. It's certainly the gold standard, and the survival rates across the country are not very high. But our master plan wants to get us at or better than that. And that's all part of our plan, and the job of our new EMS program advisor is to help us find out all the ways that we can start improving cardiac survival, not just about extra responders, but how we can even utilize what's in the community as well to improve what's out there, like community CPR and things like that. The other 2 graphics on this on this page are about how we're leveraging regional resources, and that is part of our master plan. That is, what regional partnerships can we forge, improve, because there are fire departments around us with those same skills or more, or the same kind of skills, whether that's wildland or technical rescue, things like that. Things that we as a smaller agency couldn't do just on our own, to be able to use them better than we have in the past. And so we've been working hard to do that. And I think that the most visible is that right graphic there. Probably not visible to the community, but I can tell you that now with red flag days after the Marshall fire, we certainly got together and decided there needs to be a better approach for all of us to make sure that we're using any and all resources and can dump those very, very fast when things like that are happening. And I think we call it indices-based upstaffing, but that's a concerted effort on all the regional chiefs down here in the flats to improve the ability to respond quickly to any kind of red flag day or fire starts. So those are some of the things that are happening under commitment number 1. If we can go over to commitment number 2, this is also outward facing, but this one is more about being proactive. So if we could just flip the next slide, or at least on mine, it's not changed yet. There it is. So the commitment itself is about being prepared and being resilient, which is a big thing that we're trying hard to explore all the different ways to make that happen in our community. It's not just about the responders, but how the community itself can be resilient. If you go to the next slide, I'll share some of the thoughts on what we're doing. The first bullet there probably doesn't make a lot of sense to most people, but I can tell you that this NFPA 1300 is the actual best practices standard around community risk reduction. And that Craig 1300 stands for a new tool that we've been using with our own data to help assess our own community and how we can address that. And at the end of this presentation, we have a little link that people can go to actually look up this information for Boulder in particular around community risk reduction. So that's been a huge pilot for us to work with NFPA folks and get that off the ground. We've also improved our social media presence, which is how a lot of people get their information. And we recognize the need to do that. And, Facebook, Twitter, things like that we've been trying hard to do more of. And then the biggie that we've been doing is curbside and detailed home assessments. On the heels of the Marshall Fire, we did get quite a bit behind, but are working hard to catch up on those. We no longer consider the interface to just be a small portion of the city. If anybody wants a detailed home assessment, we provide those all across the city. Our goal in the master plan is 60% of the interface. We'll probably have to rework that at our next update, but we've made a lot of progress, not just on the curbside assessments, but even getting through detailed home assessments, which is a far more comprehensive home assessment that people can have done for their home. We've added administrative FTE specifically to help with the home assessment, scheduling them. Not just that, there are other things that person is helping us do. But to give you an idea, we were well caught up, and we fell behind around 400 almost overnight. That's how quickly some of those came in. So we're working through those and trying to get those done as quickly as possible. The other things in this part of our master plan are around trying to reduce the call volume to 911 that doesn't involve an actual emergency, or it's what we call a low acuity type call. So we've been trying to look at opportunities to divert calls out of the 911 system to get people the care or the attention they need, but doesn't need an emergency responder. And there's one program we're looking into with AMR called Nurse Navigator, where the call would just get kicked over to a nurse who can actually connect folks with clinical resources or other resources. So that's something we are working hard to achieve this year. We did make a shift. Multifamily inspections is more about connecting the actual risk in the community with targeted work of our inspectors. So rather than doing a blanket inspection of everything, they are actually focusing on some of our higher risk places. That's usually the multifamily occupancies, and we've done that with a lot of success. So we've been getting those knocked out a lot. I don't have the actual numbers, but I certainly can get those. That's been a big push for our team. And the last area is work with OSMP, who has rangers who also are red carded employees that do wildland work, and trying to better identify from a citywide perspective what our wildland response team and prevention team and training team should look like, and how that would integrate best also with the greater community, the greater Boulder area as well. So there's more to be done on that this year, but that's a big part of how we leverage all the regional resources to get the best response we can from what's already in place. Let's move on to commitment 3, which actually shifts our focus away from the community and more towards the people delivering the services. So commitment 3 was really about getting our people the technology and the tools to do the job that we ask them to do in the community. If you go to the next slide, I've got just some bullets or pictorial bullets of different things that we've invested in and are about to invest in substantially. I think everybody knows about Station 3. Our plan on Station 3 is to break ground later in the summer, probably the fall, and hopefully be able to finish that station in 18 months' time and move in around 2024. That's the goal there. The other areas, though, are all areas we've invested in heavily to improve technology that are things that are already in place. So, and a good example on the technology front is, you may recall a few years ago with the CCRS tax, the radio system for all the public safety responders was something we identified as needing huge improvement, because there were so many dead spots. People would go, firefighters, police officers would be in different areas and they couldn't even transmit out. And we just finally got that system completely in place and cut over this year within the last couple months. And it is loads better than what the team had before. That's one example, but we've invested in other areas in technology. We needed to upgrade our records management system on the fire side, just to improve not just our data collection and our ability to analyze it, but also our old system was actually had reached end of life. And so we needed to invest in that. But we've also put money towards our wildland capabilities. So we've invested in giving every responder in the city a set of wildland gear so they can quickly respond to wildland fires. And we've also added to our stock of wildland equipment so that the changeover is quick. So if they respond to a fire and they need to put the equipment up and grab new, we have some of that available as well. That's been a big addition to investments. And unfortunately, the last piece, that tactical gear, in my third year, I thought that I'd be saying this, but tactical gear is something we have given now to every responder as well. In the hopefully completely unlikely event we have to undergo what we did in the last couple of years, but it's out there and available to our team for their response. So I would say that of the $1 million or so spent, not including Station 3, we have spent at least half of that towards our wildland capabilities, among other things. And the last area of commitment, if we'll turn the slide, is about how we treat our employees. And I think the city of Boulder does a fantastic job already, but there are needs unique to our responders. I want to flip that slide over one. We can at least look at the commitment. And this is really about investing in the people who are serving our community. Happy, healthy folks are going to do a far better job out in the field. So we'll flip the slide over one more. We'll talk about these last couple of points. You can see on the left some pictures of some recent hiring that we've done. I think the slide above is the big talking point, besides the one below. The one below are newest firefighters. You can see the team there, but above, they were part of a much bigger training academy that was all regional. So we had a bunch of regional academy instructors, and it was all right here done in Boulder. And I think that speaks volumes to the level of cooperation that we're seeing with all of the local departments and responders. But we've also invested in peer support for our team. Mental health and wellness is big for the community, but it's also big for our own team and making sure they're taken care of. It's unfortunate that the highest cause of death among firefighters is actually self-inflicted as opposed to the job itself. And that's something we don't want to see here. But also we've had some issues with retirement and hiring. One of our goals in the master plan is about improving the diversity of the workforce, particularly around gender. In the fire service nationally, I think we're under 4% females, and Boulder is probably tracking close to that. And our goal is actually to be far above that over the next 10 years. The real challenge, of course, is that the pool, it's just not there. The candidate pool isn't there. So we've set up a workforce development committee to help us with our recruitment, our testing. We want to lower barriers, certainly to lower income folks, because they in some cases they're paying to take the test to get on the list. There's things like that we want to explore, improving access to get on a list to be hired for all the regional departments if need be, or if we can influence that. And then I mentioned paramedic school already, but one of the other big goals in our master plan is to improve the standardized level of response that we have, the specialty team and advanced certifications. So if we're going to get resources regionally, we want to be able to provide those as well in trade. And that's something we're doing and looking forward to doing for the team as part of our master plan. And I think the most important thing I did want to share on the slide, well, I guess they're all pretty important, but a big one here at the end is this quality assurance piece. It is really, really important for us, especially as we improve our level of advanced life support, all the paramedics we have, that our patient care be excellent, bar none, and that anyone who calls 911 and is treated by our team all the way through to the hospital gets top quality care. And we've set up a quality improvement committee with our medical director and our EMS program administrator to make sure that we're looking carefully at those types of calls, and with the goal that all of our patients, or as many of them as possible, report having had a good experience and a good outcome, which is most important to us. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So those are in a very brief presentation, our update from the master plan to date. If you could pull up, I think it's 2 slides from here, because I think the next one is just questions. Go one more. There's the QR code. There are 2 websites. We are part of the city's open data piece. So on the right is a link to the open data that we have out there that comes straight out of our computer-aided dispatching system. It's not cleaned data, but it's good data. And you'll be able to see a lot of that tied into community risk reduction stuff. And then on the right side, or on the left side, the Craig 1300 is fairly new. We've run into some bumps with our new records management system. So that one is not as updated as the one on the right, but it's certainly a little cleaner than the one on the right. So I hope that makes sense. But that's our presentation for this evening. We were open now to leave it up for council questions or discussion. So I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks so much, Chief. That was really informative. It's great to see all the progress that's been made in the last 2 years since the master plan adoption. And in particular, congratulations on the accreditation. That's a big step, and read through the report. There are lots of glowing reviews and comments on the department. So questions for Chief Calderazzo? Nicole. Matt.
Thanks so much for this report. This was really helpful just in getting a better understanding of what you all do and all the many, many ways that you care for our community. So thank you for that. I just had a couple of questions. And sorry, first I just wanted to say how much I appreciate this focus on wellness. It feels like to me that's also another wonderful way to aid with retention of employees, but particularly for those who are in kind of these caretaking sorts of professions. And I imagine especially with the stressors that you all are involved in, just really, really appreciate that you all are focused on that for your employees. So I was just having a question around and thinking about some of the evacuation planning, notice planning, that sort of thing. Is there work in trying to understand how we evacuate people as we're trying to reduce the number of cars in our community? So I think this is something, right, we're talking about this a little bit later, some different tools to get people to drive less, but how are you all thinking about that, or how does that fold into the evacuation plans as we start adapting our city?
So the short answer is, at the moment, what we're doing with all of the regions around us, Louisville, Lafayette, us, I believe even Longmont's involved, and some of the other smaller communities, and the county, is we're gridding what we've done in the interface all the way through in terms of alternate routes. It's I think I mentioned this sometime back when I was in front of council about areas of focus for people to evacuate from. So it's sort of the know your zone kind of thing. And so we're working on trying to create those zones that will make sense to people and be able to get out there. Now, as far as the traffic flows and all of that, we're still working that piece out. How do we, and trying to get granular in the sense that we struggle with in a perfect world, I'd be able to say, I want to evacuate 1 first, then 2, and then 3, so that the people are not stacked up like cordwood trying to get out, and they're stuck and they become, victims or just there and they can't go anywhere. I can't make any promises. We're going to get that right perfectly, but it is definitely consideration for us in terms of being able to notify appropriately. But more importantly, first thing we have to do is figure out what those zones need to look like. And that's actually being done regionally right now as I speak. I'm not the smart one in the room to get that done, but I know there's a lot of really smart people working on that right now. And we'll be coming together in the next month or two to see some of that work and to see how we're going to then turn around, not only translate that into useful evacuation routes, and then and how we're going to be able to notify people appropriately, but also help people, the easy button version for them. You know, you, instead of trying to do, trying to figure out what this means, you just notify me, but I don't know what it means. We want to be able to set it up to where people know exactly what they need to do. Well, that's going to take some outreach. That's going to take some time. So our first step right now is just getting those zones identified, proper routes out, and then realistically, we turn to our law enforcement partners and go, okay, do you even have the staff to be able to close intersections, turn these two ways into one ways? And if you don't, what do we need to identify to make that happen? I mean, does everybody become a responder? We start closing streets and make it work. So those are some of the conversations that we're really working hard to put together. I don't know if it helps, but
Yep. Yeah, no, I think, and one of the things I was wondering was for folks who don't have cars, right? Because we're trying to kind of push people more toward, don't have a car. If you can avoid it, take the bus, ride your bike, walk, use some alternative modes of transportation. Are there conversations that are happening as well about how we start moving more people in a relatively short period of time when, we are kind of leaning on people to not have cars, to not drive as much, right?
That's a great point. And I'd be surprised if they're not talking about it, but I will be sure to insert myself in that part of the conversation, make sure we're considering it.
Thanks, I appreciate that. My other question was just around, this was on the number of personnel dedicated to fire training on page 14 of the memo that we had, said that there were 3. And I was just wondering if that feels sufficient to you, if that's enough to meet the need. It seems to me like we have a pretty significant need right now to educate folks about how to mitigate fire danger.
So that's the training for the troops, and that's so I have additional trainers for wildland in particular. So it's a little more, I guess the answer is a little more nuanced. Those are my dedicated team to training for almost all hazards. And I think we still need to work through, because there's actually regional training assets as well. So before I say, oh, well, we probably need 5. Well, if we did need 5 or 7, what can I also use from, say, the Mountain View Fire Protection District that has trainers as well? So we're actually working with them. That's also why that one slide that had all those firefighters graduate there, that's a brand new class. And that was from all of the region's responders. And the trainers actually weren't just Boulder fire trainers. There were trainers from Louisville and they were from Mountain View. So the short answer is no, I probably need more people training, but I don't know that necessarily, because of all the good work we're doing regionally, it all has to just be City of Boulder employees doing that. I think we're demonstrating that through some of these things.
Yep. And I think in hearing your response, I may have misunderstood what that was. It sounds like that's training for your staff. And what I was thinking around was how many, I thought initially it was people dedicated to training the community, or, going out and doing these home assessments and things like that. And so I guess similar question, but applying to folks in the community now. That seems, you've got, over 100,000 people to educate about this. Just wondering about how you're feeling about that kind of staffing.
Oh, for sure. I think we're working with the team to figure out what's the right size to achieve some of that outreach and that goal. And of course, the city has lots of resources there too. So we are working with the city manager's office to figure out the right way to do that through the budget process and other ways.
Great. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate all you all are doing and thinking about to keep our community safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Matt?
Thanks, Chief, for the update. And I also would definitely love to express gratitude for how quickly you and your teams have pounced on those 2 small wildfires over the past week over by Wonderland and Violet. and you guys continue to just be hammered with where we're at with fires around our community. So thank you. A lot of gratitude for the work you guys continue to do on that front. I had a couple questions. One surrounding ALS work, and I know that that's a large part in, I think in the master plan it says that by either bringing on paramedics and taking on some actual in-house ambulance duties, you could reduce response times by up to 25%. And so I'm wondering, with pandemic and where we're at, where are we in that particular process of evolution for Boulder Fire Rescue, and when might you be coming to us to start thinking about the resources needed to make those sorts of large transitions?
A great question. So the first part of that is improving the level of response from the existing trucks that are out there in service now. So that means upgrading the skill level from EMT, emergency medical technician, to paramedic on all of the trucks in the city. And our plan is to do that in the core of the city first, where the bulk of the EMS responses are, and then build that out across time so that hopefully in a few years, all of those units will be ALS along with the ambulances, and that the response times overall will mirror what we're getting with our basic life support times today, which is actually far lower than the advanced life support. So that was the plan, was to turn 3 to 4 advanced life support units into 13 or 14, and thus reduce response times down to about 6 minutes for that advanced care. So that should take a few years, but starting next year, we'll be able to hopefully upgrade at least 2 units, and council will likely see over time some of that through requests to improve the training level. So that's kind of the plan going forward, if that makes any sense.
It does. I appreciate hearing the time, because I think that when you hear 25% reduction over a period of time, that's sort of an exciting opportunity. So I appreciate you laying out the timing. The last one was really more of a.
Actually, do you mind if I follow up on that question? Because I was going to ask the same question, but I have one additional follow up on that, Mike, which is you're talking about a training question here. Are there additional kind of significant infrastructure investments that are also necessary in the next few years to bring that ALS in-house?
So the short answer is yes and no. So the Station 3, once it's built, will help, because it will allow us to, if we needed to, put additional responders in there. By upstaffing or upskilling the existing units, the quick answer is I don't need to do anything other than train the responders and make sure they have the equipment on the trucks. That's key to expanding the capability there. I do need infrastructure, but it's not just for ALS. It's really across the board. Good example is our, South Boulder, huge wildfire risk. I don't have a wildland truck there. I don't even have I can barely fit the truck that's there in the station that's there. And it would be great if we had the ability to allow those responders to don their wildland gear, jump in the wildland truck and actually go, because they can't use the truck they have. So it's those kinds of limitations I have for all hazards. It's not just ALS. But I'll tell you that ALS, I could stand up just through training, and the training basically costs overtime money plus the cost of training the people. We can start upstaffing those trucks and do that over the next few years and be able to make it, improve response times with not a huge capital investment beyond the plan that's already in place. But I really need that capital investment for the all hazards approach, particularly wildland, I would say.
Good to understand. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for indulging me. Back to you.
No, I appreciate the follow-up, Aaron. So the other one has to kind of do with just, that community engagement aspect. And, one of the things, obviously, I'm glad that you guys are chipping away at that 400 request backlog on those individual home assessments. But in the interim, there's that wonderful curbside assessment tool on the city's website. And I'm just hoping that between Boulder Fire Rescue and our city's communication staff, that we can really pepper the community so that they're empowered to know, even at a baseline curb assessment, certainly for those in the wild urban interface, whether they're a green, yellow, or red. And that may entice them to be like, oh, I'm a red, I need that assessment. Or if I'm green, maybe I don't need to fill in that and add to the backlog. Just a little bit more of personal empowerment. So I'd love to see that get out a lot more, certainly as people are thinking that we're quote unquote in a fire season when we know it's 365, but I think maybe now people are thinking about it more. So anyway, that's something I'd love to see us, and how can we help on council to really help get that word out so residents, homeowners, and renters are empowered to know what risks that they have.
We'll work on that for sure.
Mark?
I want to go back to the concept of resilience. I recently was given a tour of the wildland urban interface areas, and I was actually quite stunned at the number of homes that not only were not following best practices, they were literally kindling, awaiting a spark. And have you given any thought to either policies or ordinances we might look to address some of that? Obviously, we're not going to tell people they have to redo their home, but we might do a policy, for instance, of banning future installation of junipers west of Broadway, which I have now learned are considered gasoline on a stick, which was stunning to me since I put 7 junipers in when I redid my backyard. But that's not good practice, and we need to make people aware of good practice, and perhaps we need to go a little further in terms of ordinances or policies, going forward to create that resilience. Or what about using ARPA funds to help subsidize people who need to take out their sort of offending vegetation, or who can make changes to their home to make them more fire resilient? Because as I said, there are so many homes that I saw that are just waiting for a spark. And if there's something we can do about it, we ought to. And I was wondering if you've given any thought to what those things might be.
So yes, we definitely need to talk about alternatives to what we've already adopted. So council has already adopted the Wildland Urban Interface Code. So the international code has been adopted. It is, of course, it's not applicable retroactively. So if the homes are already there and the property is already there, it doesn't apply. It's for the new construction kind of things, the way usual adoption works. But some of your other ideas definitely we can definitely look at and potentially bring forth to council as a policy option. But I hadn't considered the juniper idea, but that's definitely a good thought.
Yeah. And by the way, thank you for the presentation. It was, as always, informative. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Mark. So I'll call on myself, and Mike, this isn't, I'm going to go to a comment here, but appreciate again all the phenomenal work the department is doing. And we're entering into a period where we're going to be considering the uses of the community culture resilience and safety tax. And we also, if the library district initiative is successful, may have some additional funds to spend. And for me personally, I would definitely look at fire resilience and a faster path to full ALS and shorter response time to be things very much worthy of consideration for spending some of those additional dollars. So my ask to you would be to think about in the next few months about how you could move some of these initiatives forward more quickly if you had additional funding available to you. Because I'd love to hear about what we might be able to accomplish as we move into the discussions about those sources of funds.
We'll do that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks so much. Any final comments, Nicole?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up on that question, Aaron. I would be particularly interested in knowing if there are things that more sort of wellness focused uses for some of those funds as well. It just strikes me that is a wellness for your staff. I mean, Chief.
Yeah, great point. Tara?
Thank you, Chief, for sharing with us about that wildland truck. And have you, or are you going to tell us how we can go forward to try to accomplish that? Or have you done that already? That seems to be important, especially in regards to South Boulder.
I was going to ask, are you referring to the one in South Boulder? So yes, actually the CCRS tax includes, at least provisionally, funding for that station down there in South Boulder. So we're trying to explore options as to whether that could be and where. And obviously that property is not big enough to do anything with at the moment. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to make that work so that we can have that asset down in South Boulder and available to the community. So we are exploring it. It's all about where do we get the land, the space to put the apparatus, the two of them in service. So, but it is in the CCRS tax listed as one of our stations that need work.
Matt?
Thanks, Aaron. And my question is kind of a question of keeping the conversation alive. I think earlier this spring we had that sort of initial update on, post Marshall and NCAR fire, where we kind of got the baseline of the work that's been done. I know that obviously there's some work that we might be talking about maybe later this summer, but I'm kind of wondering, now that we've talked a little bit about the master plan and some of that specific work that Boulder Fire and Rescue is doing, thinking about when's that next check-in that we get to dive a little bit deeper and start to really parse out perhaps policies, other investments to make our community more safe with regards to wildfire resilience. And so just as we're talking about this, I always like to, in the midst of one dialogue, know that we can already be sort of thinking about where the next one is coming from, not just for us on council, but really for the community, because I know we're getting more and more questions and concerns about the fire season and what that entails and what we're doing to keep the community safe. So knowing that those conversations are on the horizon, I think the sooner we can have that next piece of dialogue, I think all the happier for everybody.
Noted. Thank you, Matt.
Okay, well, seeing no other hands, then I'll just give a final enormous thank you, Chief, to you and to your incredible department and all the amazing work that you do to keep us safe, keep those fires out. We're very grateful. Okay, I think that finishes this item out. We are very nicely ahead of schedule. Let's see if we can maintain that. We got two smaller final items. Who do we turn to for the next one?
I think our next item is under matters from mayor and members of council, which is a discussion on a request for a not of 5. So Natalie Stifler is here to help talk about that, but it was a request that Councilmember Benjamin brought forward. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Natalie.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, council. I'm Natalie Stifler. I'm the interim director of transportation and mobility. Thanks for having us to have this conversation tonight. Just for a little bit of background, I think most folks are aware this idea came up from one of our TAB members, and they'd been talking about it, and then introduced the idea to Councilmember Benjamin. And so we've had some conversations offline about a potential pilot program for an e-bike rebate that we would potentially try to do this year. And we're certainly looking to council for that not a 5. If that's something that is council's wish, we can accommodate it. I do want to just talk a little bit about what that would look like for us. I know, so Community Cycles submitted a proposal that they could administer a pilot program for us. And that's something that staff has been reviewing over the last week, and it certainly is interested in pursuing if that's something that council would want us to do. They have the experience in administering an e-bike program. They did so this year for the Can Do Colorado grant program through the state. And so they're certainly fit to be able to do that for us. We would definitely want to make some refinements to the proposal, and that would occur through the procurement process. So we would need to go through a procurement process to be able to contract with Community Cycles to do this work. And so that would take some staff time to refine the proposal and go through that procurement process. So a little bit about the staff time. I think, we've over the last week kind of mulled over this and thought, okay, what what kind of impact this will have on our work program. We believe we can accommodate it. I think we will need to shift some things, which could cause a delay on some of the community engagement work for the CAN corridor on baseline. It wouldn't be a huge dramatic shift, but it certainly will delay just some of the staff time that we can dedicate to that project while we shift to focus on this a little bit. And then as far as timeline, what we're thinking is it would probably take us maybe the next couple of months just to refine the proposal, work with community cycles, and go through a procurement process. But we think we could launch a pilot by September. So that is still within kind of our staff did a little bit of research around like the height of peak sales for bike stores, and September is still within that window. So we think it would still be successful in kind of reaching kind of consumers and their interest for biking. So that's our thinking on timeline. And the benefit of doing a pilot program, I think, is that it can inform a future program. Staff is definitely interested in a future program, and the state of Colorado is they'll be releasing a competitive process for $12 million for e-bike programs across the state. And that's something that we would be interested in competing for. And then that funding would potentially be available in 2023 for us to launch a broader, more robust program. So the pilot would certainly help us kind of learn and shape a future program if that's something that council desires. I think that kind of sums up what my initial thoughts on it and our team's research over the last week, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks for that, Natalie. Appreciate the background info. Matt, you brought this forward. Do you want to say a few words?
I appreciate that, Aaron. And Natalie, I appreciate all the time and effort you've given into working with myself and Ryan and Sue and others to just understand, but to really be graceful within the work that you've been given as a new interim director with CAN, the big pivot, and also looking at some of our desires to be agile to sort of the current timing of things this year. So I appreciate you working with us on this a lot. I think without overstating, I think it speaks to the quality of your leadership in this department to work with us in this fashion. So I greatly appreciate that. I wanted to just maybe set up a little bit of added context to where what Natalie was saying is, for one, the idea of this e-bike program really sort of, I think, came from a successful program that Denver launched, right? They put $9 million over 3 years to an e-bike rebate program and got like 3,200 applications, 40 of which went to low income qualified individuals. And they exhausted nearly $3 million in like 2.5 weeks. That's how popular the program was. Now, obviously, they need to refine it and make some tweaks for good and the bad. But just in terms of the potential success that we could have in a community like ours, I think kind of speaks for itself. So I think that was really a leading catalyst for this. And the pilot really came out of one, this is, we have an opportunity this year. Gas prices are nearing all-time high. Can we, nimbly meet some of our community's needs and use the economic strain that high gas prices are having to get people out of their cars and perhaps reduce their VMT and really start to, take some bites out of our VMT reductions and meet some of our climate goals. So that's why a pilot was really thought of, and that it could be a great way, as Natalie said, to leverage lessons learned to inform for a perhaps larger program to launch in 2023. So I just wanted to set that up from motives for why that was, and just appreciate Natalie really working hard to try to understand what was going on and try to make this work. So I will be quiet unless there's questions I can answer about the proposal, perhaps, since I had worked with Community Cycles to help set that up. So I will step aside.
Thanks, Matt. Thoughts from council members? Tara?
Well, I guess, Natalie, my first question is when you say it's going to take time away, we did ask staff to switch from what they were currently doing to CAN when we talked about it. So are you being truthful when you're saying that it's just going to be a little bit of work? Because I know it's very difficult for staff to switch to something and then switch to something else. So that's my first question to you. How much is it going to push back?
Thanks, Tara, or thanks, Councilmember Weiner. Yeah, I can definitely be more clear about that. I think we certainly will, it will take significant staff time over the next couple months. And so we will need to shift away from the community. What we were planning to do with baseline was to begin our community engagement for the baseline corridor as part of CAN. So that is certainly going to be delayed to do this work.
So I'm just going to say that I would not like to delay the baseline corridor. So I do love my e-bike so much, but I don't know that I want to do that to you. I don't know that we want to do that. So I'm just going to say I probably don't, but I want to move on to my number one subject, which I've told you before, and that is lighting in our underpasses, because many of our bikers, especially women and children, tell me that the underpasses are dark. Some of the lights don't work. Some of the bulbs are out. Even the ones where the bulbs are not out, some of them are quite dark, and they don't feel safe. So I'm wondering what about that as a proposal? Can we fit that in to the next year or two? Does that have to do with your department? And what do you think about that? Does that affect the e-bikes? Because to me, the two issues about biking, besides, yes, I want everybody to be on a bike, is it safe everywhere? And also, I'm thinking about, bike theft, which is a whole nother subject, but just leaving it for transportation right now and lighting. What do you feel about adding that on to your work program, and when? Or is that not even you?
No, so lighting in the underpasses is transportation. And yeah, thank you for that question. That's something that we can certainly look at as we go into 2023 and 2024 work planning. We've talked about kind of updating our standards around lighting and underpasses, and if that would be something that would be necessary, kind of looking industry-wide, if that's something that is something that we just need to do. And that would be something that we could look at in the next couple years in our work program.
Yeah, I was thinking about some sort of a study, and I want to apologize to Matt for changing the subject for just a bit. Okay, we can go back to Matt's subject now. Thanks, Matt.
All right, thanks for the question, Tara. We've got Lauren, Rachel, Nicole.
Thank you. Yeah, I was wondering if there are any, is there a level at which this is easier to implement? You know, if the pilot program is under a certain size, does that make it easier to run and not take staff time away? Or, I'd be open to other ideas as well, because I do think that the high gas prices and things like that is, a real burden for people in our community, and looking at, B-cycle passes or enhanced, bus passes, things like that. Are there any other programs that we might look at that might be easier to implement?
So I think with the e-bike rebate idea, we've kind of minimized it to as least impactful as it could be on our work program. I don't know that we could make it so that it's still effective and make it any smaller. I don't know that could be done. That was kind of the intent with the pilot, was that it would be pretty minimal, and that still has a significant impact on our work plan.
Thank you.
Rachel, Nicole, and Matt.
Thanks, Natalie. And thanks for raising this, Matt. It's a great idea. I have a couple of questions first, I don't want to disturb the CAN flow. So I'm not going to, vote or have any preference in favor of that outcome. I think we need to, sort of finish the race that we started already on that one, and understand that you're saying staff can't balance both. So appreciate that. When it does come back, just a couple of things that I would hope to see. I think everybody's pretty impressed with the Denver program, and there are some other places. I am curious how much of that was sort of from the county versus the city when it comes back to us. Like, what pot of money did they use? Is this something that a county would ordinarily lift up. I think that Boulder County is looking at it. So is that something that we can partner on? So just flagging that for when it comes back. It sounds like in early 23 if it goes according to that schedule. And then also if our goal is truly to reduce vehicle miles traveled, what is the price point at which someone who's on the fence about buying an e-bike can then buy it? I assume that if I'm a billionaire, this program's not for me. I assume that, if I have no disposable income, it's really good for me. But then there must also be a middle category of people who would like an e-bike and can't quite afford it, may not be lower, even middle income qualified, but just can't get there. So I would love some research and study on what is that like sweet spot for the city to plug in at.
Yeah, we'll definitely be thinking about that. Thank you.
Nicole?
Thank you. I have a sort of process question that I think may not be you, Natalie. I think this may be a Nuria question or a fellow council question. What's the process for responding to things like this that come up from our boards or from outside groups in the community? How do we sort of, do we have a process for, evaluating and responding to these kinds of requests? I guess, one of the questions that I'm thinking of is just the trade-offs, right? What are we not investing in? And, Matt, you referenced high gas prices, right? That is absolutely hitting people right now. So are high rent prices, so are high food prices. And so I'm thinking about all the folks who are struggling, even just to make rent or put food on their table right now. And so when I think about having $100,000 to give toward a program that's going to help people, I'm just wondering how do we even begin to kind of evaluate that space of when we're choosing to do things that are going to take us off of our work plan, that aren't on staff's immediate work plan. How do we make that choice? I don't even know.
Nicole, I think I'll jump in and take your question first. And I think it's a really good one. And maybe this is actually something I should have done when we started this item, is just to tee up a little bit. How does this process work? Because I think this is the first time we've maybe had a discussion like this, which is, after the retreat, we really try and settle in what's the year's work program look like. And for the council priorities, that's for the next 2 years. And then, there's always a little bit of slack that we try and program into the work plan. I'll be honest, we're not very good at it. We, if anything, kind of overcommit ourselves. But if there's something that comes up during the year, from a council member where it would maybe require a reshuffle of the work plan, we may have to put something on hold to be able to now put this onto the stack. That's where we'll come to council and have a conversation. And what's in the council handbook and rules is this concept of a nod of 5, essentially 5 council members nodding yes, reshuffle things because we want this item to now move forward. And that's really what the request is here today, is we would put the can on hold for a few months at the baseline work to be able to now put this program in. And I think then to your broader question, which is, how do I compare this to maybe other things that are priorities out in the community? I think that's something for each of you to kind of consider when you're evaluating that. It's a little hard, obviously, outside of kind of a budget conversation. And obviously with all of the various funds that the city has, certain monies can only be used for certain things. But I think that's something to always think about, especially during conversations like this. So that's really what's on the table today. Isn't necessarily the merits or the details of what an e-bike rebate would look like, and more of are you interested and are you willing to kind of make that trade-off to add something here to the work plan. And I think Natalie has kind of laid out what that would mean from a work plan standpoint. Is that helpful?
Yes. Yeah. It's basically just, I need to make up my own mind. That's what you're saying. Totally fine. I love it when there are processes that help me figure out what to do. So just, oh, sorry, Aaron.
Yeah. Well, just Nicole, I was just going to follow up from Chris when you said, what's the process? I'm afraid you're looking at it.
Okay.
Right,
This
we're
is
in
good
the
to
middle
know
of it.
too, right? It's just good to know how things work. Okay, thank you. Then I am going to kind of echo Tara and Rachel and just feel like I don't want to change course from what we decided just a few months ago, especially since that was a relatively big course. And I just want to mention for the next time this comes up, because I hear, folks saying that there's some interest in it as well. One of the things that I want to think about is who's benefiting from a program like this. Is it the folks who kind of are most in need, the people who are most hurting in our community? Are we going to be, meeting a need that that is addressing some of the inequities in our city? And the thing that I think about, especially with a program like this, that's a rebate. Right now, we had the announcement at the beginning of the meeting about the food sales tax rebate, which is, there's been a lot of outreach kind of done. There's still a lot of folks living in lower income communities that have still not heard about this program, and the fact that the deadline is 9 days away. So, how do we think about doing the outreach and engagement for a program like this to make sure that that the folks who are most in need will have some benefit from it? And then the other thing that Lauren mentioned very briefly was around eco passes and, thinking about driving folks to using other alternatives, right, that they may take to driving their cars. I think that's something that I'd be really interested in as well. And Natalie, I know you and I talked about this at one point as well, just this idea of kind of wallets for mobility that people could use for different types of non-single occupancy vehicles that would help them get around.
Yeah, thank you for that. We're definitely thinking about it.
Matt, Mark, then I'll call on myself.
Thanks, Aaron. And I appreciate all of my colleagues weighing in on this. And, it's interesting having lifted this up for conversation. I too share the same concern as Tara and Nicole and Rachel. Having, shared time with Rachel to lift up CAN a few months ago, the last thing I'd want to do is undercut, a program child of mine, if you will. So that's a hard place to be in, to want to see success, have my cake and eat it too. But I will say that, in light of what are clearly the parameters and constraints around staff trying to lift up a pilot, I too don't want to see CAN delayed to achieve that. In light of that, though, it does frustrate me a bit of that there's that it is not any individual, not any department, that just our institution as a whole may lack the agility maybe needed to tackle and take on things like this when the moment is what needs to be seized. The conditions are right for it now. So that's maybe something reflective we think about in our process and what we are as an institution. So yeah, I don't want to see it delayed. So yes, I lifted it up, but if the sacrifice is to delay, I would choose not to do that. But the silver lining is that, and I give Natalie a lot of credit here, is that there's a lot of excitement, at least it seems from Natalie and staff, to think about this program and not just transportation. There seems to be excitement from climate and Jonathan Cohen's team and the city managers. There seems to be a lot of excitement that this program could be good for our community in the long run with a little bit more runway to think about it and procure it. And so that really excites me that a TAB member can toss this idea out. There can be a little bit of momentum. And here we might have a program that comes to fruition next year that could really benefit our community. So I don't think all is lost because we didn't get a pilot, but because I think, and I'm hopeful that 2023 might deliver a successful program for our community that might last a long time and benefit our community for years to come. So a long way of saying, yep, with the impact and stated timing of September, that's not something I'm willing to support, even though it was my idea to bring to council. So strange way to bring it up and shoot myself down. But nonetheless, here we are. So thanks, Natalie.
Matt, thanks for that flexibility. Do you mind if I just ask you formally withdraw your request for a not a 5?
If that makes it simpler, I'm happy to do that here. I'm reading the tea leaves pretty well. But it was more just waiting for that assessment from Natalie in her office. And so I think that kind of makes it pretty clear, but I'm excited to see what we have in 2023.
Very good. So then I'll call on Mark and I'll say just a couple quick words.
And just a question for Natalie and Chris. There seems to be interest in the idea, but little interest in upsetting the work plan at this time. Is there any kind of lower level inquiry that we can make that will not impact the work plan, that might move us a little bit forward on this, maybe clear some of the underbrush out and be in a better position when we do have the opportunity to look at it in a more substantive way, or is that simply not available to us?
So I think if I understand your question correctly, so we'll be over the next, several months, just as part of our normal work program, when we look at grant opportunities. There's a grant opportunity that will be coming available later this year that's competitive, and our staff will be paying attention to that, and we'll be looking at that opportunity to go after funding that could lead to an eventual program in the future. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does. I mean,
Okay.
it's just sort of making some substantive progress on the issue, even if we're not getting a nod of 5 today to move it forward. Because I sense that there's interest in the substance of the program, but not the timing of the program.
Yes, and I'll just call on myself there, and then Tara, that I agree, Mark and Matt. Thanks so much for raising this up, because I think a program like this would be really beneficial to the community. And I love how Community Cycles in their last program they did with separate funding really measured the impact of the program. So I'd love to see something like that. So Natalie, really thrilled to see you're considering this for 2023. That grant program sounds really promising. And then hopefully we'll also have an extension of the cap tax that I would say we should consider this as a possibility as well. Not that we need to talk about that right now, but I just, because we should finish up, but just mention that real quick. Tara and Matt.
Well, I'm just reminding people that there is a labor shortage, and we don't know when it's going to change. And we also love Natalie. So I'm hoping that we as a city council could be flexible about our most beloved programs as well. Because between the supply chain, the labor shortage, and inflation, we really don't know when everything is going to turn around. So I'm hoping for flexibility on our part in terms of what year, even though, I think it's a great idea.
Very good. Matt?
It is just more of a general thanks and gratitude, and as I've said, to Natalie and her team, but also to Community Cycles and to the members of TAB and Ryan Schuchard, and just how this all came together and people quickly trying to find the best way to make it work. And so even though it's not going to happen in short order, I want to commend the collaborative nature in which everyone brought ideas together to try to figure out a way to make this work. And sometimes they don't in people's best intent. And in this case, it didn't. And that's okay. But I think something greater may come out of it on the back end. But I just want to make sure good thanks is given to Community Cycles and Sue and folks there, and Ryan over at TAB and a bunch of his colleagues. So, and then of course, right back to you, Natalie, and your team. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Natalie. Okay. Well, I think that brings us to a close on this item. We have one more matter about the ballot measures. And Teresa, should I hand this over to you?
Sure, Mayor. I have Kathy Haddock on with us. And what we wanted to do was have a quick process conversation to talk about whether we want to separate out the items that are for even year voting from the other process changes. And I'll let Kathy get into the details of that.
Thank you, Teresa. And I'm Kathy Haddock in the city attorney's office. And right now we have 3 ballot questions that deal with the issues related to council members and the even year election. We first put in a separate ordinance about the swearing in date being in December rather than in November in one ordinance. And then in the second ordinance deals with the even year election. And then the third one deals with the extending I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong list, that you can't run for any more more than one office at an election, but a council member whose term doesn't expire can apply for mayor. So there's the 3 different concepts are all in the same part of the charter. And Nicole's suggestion on line, as I understand it, and obviously she can speak to it, but is to separate all the things related to changing elections to even year to one ballot question and everything else to a separate ballot question. And that is something that we can do. I think what we'd really like to get out of this, hopefully a quick discussion, not asking you to go into any substance, is what it is you'd like to see on July 21st when we've moved the first reading things to. And some of those things, hopefully you can let us know tonight about how you want those divided up. There's a couple of other things that we think you'll have to let us know later. But first, if you want to talk about the first one first, Nicole's suggestion, I'll be quiet so you can.
Are you asking Nicole to speak to her earlier suggestion?
Or all of you, we're looking for direction on how you would like to see the ballot questions come to you with respect to those that are for even year election changes and those that have to do more cleanup type things. They're both in the same part of the charter, is why they're mixed differently than I think Nicole was thinking would be ideal.
Great, thanks for that tee up. Nicole, Matt, and then Mark.
Thanks, Kathy, for the quick overview. And just to give you all the background on where my hotline questions were coming from, what I was concerned about is what happens if voters don't want even year elections, right? They don't want to do that switch. Then does all the cleanup stuff go down with it? So that's why I was thinking it would be helpful to have them as two separate issues so that voters can hopefully approve some of the needed cleanup stuff and then decide what they want to do about even year elections.
Great, Matt, Mark.
Thanks, Aaron. And I appreciate you bringing this up, Nicole. Helpful to have, I think, this conversation. I would absolutely agree. The cleanup language needs to be absolutely separated. Certainly because some of this cleanup actually impacts the direct election of the mayor with RCV. So if this were to go down, we would lose the cleanup that's needed for something that's already law. So I think we have to separate them almost intrinsically. So for that nature. So I think that's a helpful piece to definitely do. And then certainly, the going to even year in concept is actually rather simple. It's the mechanics that we've chosen that make it a little more complicated. So the ballot measure itself, we need to think about as being as precise and concise as possible. And so stripping out anything that's extemporaneous and not solely focused on that issue at hand, to me, I think can only add confusion. And we know how reading ballot measures are. It tends to not be layman, it tends to be legal speak. For those of us that aren't attorneys, it can be a tough time to wade through them. So that's sort of my direction, is to really parse them out. So even year is focused on itself, and then cleanup is a separate package.
Good. Mark, Bob, and I'll call myself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the cleanup is necessary. Clarifying that you can only run for one office unless you have a term that has not expired is not necessarily tied into whether we go to even year or not. And so that should be separate and apart. Going to even year is its own subject and should be a separate ballot measure. So I would separate the even year question from cleanup questions, and I would keep them segregated and have separate resolutions for each of them, actually.
Bob?
Yeah, I agree. Also, I think the even year election is a whole package in itself, which does have multiple parts, and I think that needs to stand on its own. It may or may not pass. I think there's two other questions. One truly is cleanup, and then one is a relatively minor point. So I guess I'm agnostic about whether the cleanup and the minor point are combined, or it's a third ballot measure. It doesn't really matter, because I think it would pass anyway. And that's just the deferral of swearing in until December. I'm not sure that that's going to be too controversial. So if people want to combine that with the cleanup, that's perfectly fine. Or if they want three ballot measures, that's perfectly fine too. I did have a question, however, for the lawyers. There were two issues back when Matt and I and so that others were working on the direct election mayor back in 2020. There were two issues that we wanted to make sure were captured, and one I think was captured back in 2020, and one wasn't, and that's the origin of the cleanup. The one that wasn't was this point about a person can't run for mayor and council seat at the same time. So that truly is cleanup. That was just a miss, quite frankly, from 2020. One thing that I do think that was gotten correctly, and I'm puzzled why we're putting it back in again, is I'm looking in the draft language, Teresa, that you sent out under section 5 that says, if a council member whose term is not ending the November of the election wins election to office of mayor, then council candidate receiving the 5th highest vote in that same election shall complete the council member's term. That's logical. I think that's already in it. Didn't we put that in the 2020 ballot measure? If we did, why are we doing it again? If we didn't, then I guess there were 2 misses in 2020.
It's actually just relocated in 5 to put all of those types of issues together, because it kind of went back and forth as you go through Charter Section 5. So you're absolutely right. It was already in there. It's just being moved.
So it's not a new concept. It's just a shifting within the charter.
Exactly.
Great. That's the only question I have. I fully support separating these out into at least 2 ballot measures or 3 as council wishes.
Thanks for that, Bob. So seems like we're coming to consensus. I agree with what's been said. So does anyone object to separating them out into 2 ballot measures, the cleanup measure and even your election measure? No, nobody objects. Okay, very good. And then are people okay with combining the 2 kind of cleanup things, the swearing in date change and the other one about the mayoral election? Are people okay with that? All right, I'm seeing generally thumbs up, no thumbs down. So very good. It sounds like direction is to go for 1 cleanup that includes both of them. They're a little different from each other, but I think they're both really cleanup things. And then the other one for even your elections. Very good. Kathy and Teresa, does that give you what you need to put together the things for next month?
It gives us everything that we need for you to talk about right now, but to give you a heads up for what we're asking for next is another issue that has come up is that by extending council members for terms for a year to get to the even year rotation, also the way that I wrote the ballot language, it would extend the mayor's term for another year just because we put the same language that was in the charter before. But that was a specific direction from you guys. So if there's different direction that you want, or you want to do some different selection of the mayor part from 2023 to 2026, however you would do it for that time period, I need to know that. And then some other council members have mentioned that there's other language that they wanted. So ideally, if you could get that to us by July 8th, we would have time to present options to you in the packet next time so that we're not doing too much drafting during the meeting. I mean, probably there's always going to be some drafting, but I'd really like the opportunity to think through specific concepts to make sure that we have it well drafted for you to consider at the July 21st meeting.
Very good. So I'll just say on the mayor question, I'm happy with the will of council regardless. I feel like I should recuse myself from the discussion since I'm the currently sitting mayor. But first I'll just do we want to talk about that tonight, or do we want to identify it as a topic to discuss at the next meeting in July? I think I had Matt and then Nicole real quick on this process thing.
I mean, it makes total sense to have the mayor included in that because the language already in the charter for the direct election of the mayor already states the mayoral term being 2 years. So by only doing an extension of the year, we don't have to mess up what the term is. It's just, it gets an extension, puts us on cycle, and then the term as it's currently defined in the charter just carries on from there. So from a simplistic manner, we get to then, because it's already in the charter that it's a 2-year term. So if we just extend, we can get on cycle the easiest way that way versus having to do a bunch of other steps of changing the term. So I agree that is from what Kathy was saying, it's the simplest way to achieve the outcome of bringing the mayor along with council to get on cycle.
Very good. I was actually asking if we should talk about it tonight as a kind of a threshold question, but I appreciate the Nicole, go ahead.
Yes, I appreciate the comment, Matt. I was going to advocate for waiting until our next meeting to talk about it, just because this is something that's relatively new for me. I like having a little bit of time to think about things. I personally would prefer a later conversation, knowing that this is a question that we're going to be addressing.
Okay, and I'll just say any objections to waiting until next month, since we got that put on the table, but Mark shakes his head. Rachel?
Not an objection, just that it would be nice to hear from the community as well. Like, we're all just thinking about it for the first time. And I think that another pretty simple option is just, we have a 1-year mayor vote internally, like we always do. So I think that that is an option, and want to put that on the table if community members are weighing in.
Very good. Okay, are people comfortable with waiting to have the discussion until next month, understanding that there is a conversation to be had? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up or shaking head, so that's good. And then point taken from Kathy about if you're thinking about any other kinds of language changes or subject changes, to please submit those in advance so that we're doing the least amount of editing on the fly possible. Does that cover everything, Kathy?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
All right. I think that's it. I think that's it. We're actually running an hour and 50 minutes ahead of schedule. So I'm very grateful to everyone for an efficient meeting and discussion. It's been some great discussions tonight and quick.
I feel bad that Junie was not able to join us, but I feel good about the fact that we're adjourning before 9 o'clock. So Junie, sorry.
Yes.
8:39. I'm going to go outside and look for Haley's Comet. I mean, this is unbelievable.
I think it's solstice, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, enjoy.
Yeah, still got some light left. Okay, well, thanks again, everyone, for a great meeting, and wish Junie luck in her campaign for the CML board. We'll be rooting for her and voting for her in a couple of days. And at 8:40 p.m., we'll gavel this meeting to a close.
Great work.
Bye, everyone.